Hey guys, tonight we drift into something utterly, magnificently uneventful. A Greek myth so sleepy it might just outsnore the Trojan War. Picture this, clouds rolling over Mount Olympus like a lazy fog machine. The gods lounging on marble thrones with golden goblets and absolutely no sense of boundaries. You can almost smell the burnt goat offerings wafting through the air, mingling with the aroma of drama that's been simmering since eternity. And in the middle of it all, Zeus, pouting again. You're standing at the edge of Olympus, sandals slightly too tight, breeze smelling faintly of ozone and olives. There's tension in the air, emotional tension, not the thunderbolt kind. Hera, queen of the gods, wife of the very flirty Lightning King, is narrowing her eyes. You get the feeling that someone's about to get turned into something, again. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments what time is it where you are and where are you listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You remember when you were a kid and thought gods were probably wise, glowing beings? Yeah, no. Here, on Olympus, you're basically watching a divine reality show in sandals. And this episode starts like most Greek myths, with Zeus being a mess. He's lurking around the clouds again, doing that thing where he pretends to be checking on mortals, but is actually trying to flirt with someone who doesn't want thunder in her life. That someone is Io, a priestess, innocent, intelligent, and, unfortunately, noticeable. The myths say she was either chosen by Zeus or cursed by fate or just really, really unlucky. The sources don't agree. You get the impression even the scribes weren't paying full attention. Like, oh, another girl turned into an animal? Standard Tuesday. Anyway, Zeus notices Io and decides, for reasons unfathomable to modern HR departments, that she must become the focus of his attention. But here's the twist. He actually tries to hide it this time, which is how you know he's already doing something sketchy. Zeus blankets the land in a thick, magical fog, which is the divine equivalent of drawing the curtains during daylight. Clouds swirl, shadows dance, and somewhere in the middle of this chaotic privacy setting, Zeus makes his move. Now, here's the thing about myths. They're vague on purpose. What happens in that fog? Some say she was seduced. Others say she was terrified. Some even suggest she was trying to escape a prophetic dream. You'd think gods would keep better records. But no matter which version you subscribe to, one thing's clear. Hera notices. And when Hera notices, things go bovine fast. Hera, being no fool, sees the fog roll in like a suspicious tab in your browser history. She's immediately like, clouds? Really? How original! And boom, she descends from Olympus faster than you can say awkward confrontation. And this is the part that gets weird, even by myth standards. Zeus, seeing Hera approach, panics, like full-on divine panic. And what does he do? Does he tell the truth? Apologize? Distract her with another golden apple? Nope. He turns Io into a cow. Yes, a literal grazing, mooing cow. And not even a pretty mythical cow with golden horns or rainbow udders, just a regular cow. Brown, maybe? Definitely confused. Probably lactose intolerant now, ironically. You watch Hera land with that trademark thunderous silence only a queen of gods can pull up. She's looking around, pretending not to know, eyes sweeping the fog. And then she sees it. A cow, just chillin'. Definitely not a transformed mortal, totally normal bovine stuff. She raises an eyebrow. Nice cow. Zeus sweating divine bullets. Thanks, just found her. Wild thing, no idea where she came from, not involved at all. And that, my friend, is how Io's new life begins. Not as a priestess, not as a lover, not even as a fugitive, but as livestock. Mooing gently, tail flicking, while the two most powerful deities in the universe performed the most passive-aggressive scene in mythological history. There's a historical note here. Ancient Greek society viewed transformation myths as moral or cautionary tales, allegories for losing your identity to desire or fear, or, for avoiding your jealous wife's celestial wrath. But there's also the argument among scholars that this myth originally came from pre-Hellenic fertility cults. Some suggest Io was always a cow goddess, later reinterpreted into a victim. Others say she represents moon deities or agricultural cycles. Honestly, it feels like someone sneezed on the papyrus halfway through writing. Still, the image is powerful. Hera smiling just a little too much, and Zeus petting a cow with trembling fingers, whispering, "Just be cool, just be cool." You lean back. You can almost hear the breeze ruffling the divine robes, the cow's quiet huff of breath, the unspoken "we'll talk about this" echoing in Hera's eyes. And somewhere, Io is already regretting ever being born near Olympus. Io's transformation into a cow isn't even the weirdest part. You'd think maybe after pulling a move like that, Zeus would just send her to some quiet pasture to live out her days eating buttercups and sighing about what could have been. But no, that would be too merciful and also far too low drama for the gods. Hera, still smiling that tight-lipped, suspicious smile, is definitely not buying it. "Oh, what a lovely cow," she purrs. "May I keep her?" Now this is not a real question. This is Hera giving Zeus the divine equivalent of the "I know what you did last summer" look, but with floral undertones. Zeus can't say no. He's already sweating through his toga. So, with the enthusiasm of someone signing over their browser history, he nods. "Of course, dear." And that's how Hera becomes the proud owner of one very distressed cow, who, by the way, is still fully conscious and aware of her human past. Imagine the panic, chewing grass with human thoughts, mooing in frustration, dodging flies while your brain is screaming, "I used to lead rituals." You trail behind the new arrangement as Hera assigns Argus Panoptus, yes, the guy with 100 eyes, to guard the cow. Because if you're going to be extra, go all the way. Argus doesn't even blink much. He doesn't need to. Half of his eyes stay open while the others nap, rotating shifts like an airport security camera with a caffeine addiction. Argus is a strange one. His origin is debatable. Some say he was a giant, others a monster, others just an incredibly paranoid guy who evolved in the worst possible way. One thing's for sure, if anyone was going to be stuck watching a cow 24/7, it was going to be him. And Hera knew it. So now Io, once a respected priestess, is under 24-hour surveillance, munching grass, guarded by a biological surveillance drone. Occasionally, she tries to moo Morse code. No luck. The locals? Oh, they notice. They start whispering about the mysterious cow in the meadow. Some say she's a ghost, others that she's cursed. There's even one potter who swears the cow nodded at him when he sneezed. Honestly, if there had been ancient tabloids, Io would have had her own column. Moving Tales, the cow that watches you back. And while you're standing there, watching Argus hum lullabies to himself while polishing his foot eyes, yes, he has eyes on his feet, don't ask, you can't help but feel for Io. She can't sleep, she can't speak, she can't even blink suspiciously without triggering another lecture from Argus about appropriate cud-chewing posture. Here's where the mythology starts layering in meanings like baklava. Some believe Io's cow form symbolizes suppression of voice and identity, a woman literally silenced by transformation and surveillance. Others suggest she represents the moon, with Argus as the watchful stars. And of course, there's a camp that believes this whole thing is just an extended metaphor for what happens when your crush gets way too intense. Anyway, Zeus is still watching from the sidelines, chewing his celestial fingernails. Eventually, he decides it's time to rescue Io, not because he's grown a conscience, but because he's tired of the silent treatment. Also, cows don't send love notes. So, he turns to Hermes, god of messengers, trickery, and travel. Basically, the Swiss Army knife of Olympus. If there's mischief to be done with flair, Hermes is your guy. Picture a smug teen with winged sandals and ADHD. Now give him a flute. Zeus says, "Go deal with the eye guy." Hermes nods, not asking questions, because this isn't his first free the weirdly cursed mortal gig. He heads down to Earth, flute tucked under his arm, eyes twinkling with mischief. Now, what follows is what scholars might call the first recorded bedtime assassination. Hermes strolls up to Argus, who's trying to count blades of grass with his left elbow eye. "Nice day for guard duty," Hermes says casually. Argus shrugs with 10 shoulders. "It's fine." Then Hermes pulls out his flute and starts playing, slowly, softly, like an ancient lullaby mixed with smooth jazz. Argus blinks. Half his eyes close. Hermes talks about sheep. Argus blinks again. Hermes starts weaving a story, something about ocean turtles and the meaning of moss. Argus yawns, and one by one, every eye droops shut. And when the last eye closes, poetic of course, Hermes pulls out a blade and, well, Argus is no longer an issue. It's clean, it's quiet, it's very Greek. Now, the historical tidbit here, Argus's death is one of the earliest examples in mythology where cleverness trumps brute force. Hermes doesn't fight, he lulls. It's mythic ASMR, soothing storytelling as a weapon. And some say that's why Hermes was beloved by travelers, not because he was strong, but because he could talk his way out of anything. But the aftermath? Oh, it's messy. Hera mourns Argus, not because she liked him, he was basically living CCTV, but because he was loyal. So she takes all his eyes and places them on her sacred animal, the peacock. That's why peacocks have all those eye spots, in case you've ever wondered. Which, if you think about it, makes every peacock strut a mini surveillance parade, fashionable but judgmental. So now Io is free. Sort of. No more Argus. But Hera? She's not done. Of course not. You sigh. You were really hoping this was the end. That Io might get to munch in peace and maybe open a dairy co-op. But no. Hera, still seething, sends a gadfly, a nasty, biting little thing, to torment Io constantly. And suddenly, she's running. Across fields, rivers, mountains, everywhere she goes, the fly follows. Nipping, buzzing, maddening. So much for peace. You follow Io, still very much a cow, through the wilds of the ancient world as she flees from that relentless, infernal gadfly. No one ever talks about the emotional toll of being chased across continents while also ruminating. But here she is, hooves pounding over rocky terrain, tails swishing in pure annoyance, ears flicking like she's doing interpretive dance. The gadfly? It's not just annoying, it's a message. Hera's whisper in insect form. You don't get to run from the consequences, darling. And so Io keeps going, day after day. She crosses rivers and forests, wades through swamps, and likely ruins countless farmers' crops. You picture her muttering, "Sorry, sorry, sacred mission, don't mind the moo." Eventually, Io stumbles into Egypt, exhausted and half-mad. And this is where things start to shift. Now, historians still debate whether her arrival in Egypt was meant as a literal migration or a symbolic crossing, perhaps representing the merging of Greek and Egyptian mythologies. Either way, you're here now, standing beside a panting, trembling cow as she stares at the pyramids and probably wonders, have I died and landed in the world's most confusing dairy commercial? And here's the twist. In Egypt, Io transforms back into a human. Boom, just like that. Some versions say Zeus is finally allowed to intervene fully, touching her with his godly light or whatever euphemism the ancients used. Others claim it's the magic of Egypt itself, a place of resurrection and rebirth, where she sheds her bovine form like a bad memory. Either way, she's back. Flesh and bones, skin and voice. No more mooing, no more cud. But she's also pregnant. Because yes, remember Zeus? This isn't just a myth, it's a myth with consequences. Her son, Epiphus, is born soon after and becomes a king in Egypt. That's right, from priestess to cow to queen mother of an entire dynasty. And you thought your week was complicated. Here's the historical anchor for you. The Greeks genuinely believed in these intersections with Egyptian culture. Epiphus is often linked to the founding of Memphis, no, not the Elvis one, and is sometimes even associated with the Egyptian god Apis, who was, naturally, a sacred bull. The symbolism just loops right back around like a cosmic joke. The myth gets more layered here. Some say that Io, after all her suffering, becomes Isis. Yes, that Isis, the great Egyptian goddess of motherhood and magic. Others disagree, suggesting the Greeks simply borrowed and adapted stories to explain cultural overlap. But the idea that this once cursed woman becomes a deity of compassion and wisdom, it's poetic, messy, deeply satisfying. You sit beside Io as she cradles her son. The Nile murmurs nearby. Palm trees sway like old gods watching from a distance. She doesn't say much, just breathes. And in that breath, you feel it. Resilience. This isn't just a story of divine chaos. It's one of survival, of running through pain and emerging, hooves or no hooves, into something softer. But we're not done. Oh no. Because Hera never really lets things go. She doesn't show up waving thunderbolts or unleashing hydras this time. She does something worse. She waits. You hear whispers that Io's descendants are now tied to fate, that her line is cursed with entanglements far beyond one generation. In fact, you can trace the bloodline of Io all the way to one of the most famous tragic women in mythology, Andromeda. Yes, the same Andromeda who ends up chained to a rock because her mom compared her to sea nymphs. Family drama doesn't skip generations. And even more ominously, Io's descendants eventually lead to Heracles, Mr. 12 Labors himself. Which means the gods aren't done meddling with this bloodline, not even close. There's a strange weight in the air as you realize how far-reaching this single myth stretches. One woman's suffering, transformation, and flight becomes a mythic domino effect that echoes through generations. Io might be free now, but her story is still in motion. You lean back, watching the Nile glitter in the moonlight. Maybe the gods have quieted for the night. Maybe the gadfly is dead. Maybe Io will get to rest for a while. She deserves it. You deserve it. But you know, deep down, that in mythology, peace is always temporary. And just off in the distance, beyond the reed beds and crocodile-laden marshes, something else is stirring. Oh, and a fun aside. Did you know the Greeks used to believe that cows were closer to the divine because of their calm eyes and ability to digest anything with grace? Honestly, if Io had known that, she might have embraced her cow era a little more proudly. But for now, you close your eyes beside her, wondering what it means to be transformed by pain and still walk, hoof or heel, towards something better. Io may have found peace, for now, but your journey through divine pettiness is just hitting its stride. Because even though she's resting beside the Nile, catching her breath and maybe sipping water in a very unbovine way, the gods aren't finished, not even close. You turn your gaze toward the looming spires of Mount Olympus, and there, on a cloudy veranda with a view better than any Airbnb, you find Hera, still seething. Not dramatically, mind you. No, this is the kind of quiet fury only immortal queens can perfect. The kind that brews slowly and wears pearls while plotting. She watches Io from afar, her lips tight, one eyebrow arched like she's about to deliver a scathing Yelp review. Because remember, Io's not the only player here. Hera has a reputation to maintain. She's the goddess of marriage, yes, but she's also the patron saint of never forgetting. Every slight, every betrayal, every woman who dared get Zeus's attention, real or not, she catalogs them like vintage wine. You might be wondering, why doesn't she go after Zeus instead of the poor mortals he charms? Well, scholars argue that ancient myths reflected the gender dynamics of their time. In a society where women were expected to be loyal and men weren't, Hera became the symbolic enforcer of order, especially when it came to protecting her title and divine authority. Still, some modern readers, and plenty of exhausted cows, might argue she needed a new coping strategy. Aromatherapy maybe? Or a good therapist with experience in god complexes. Anyway, this is where things get strange. Hera starts whispering about revenge not just in the moment, but through bloodlines. She plants seeds. She watches as Io's descendants move through history. Some rise to greatness, others stumble, and a few end up starring in their own tragic plays. The detail historians love here, the myth of Io's lineage doesn't just stop at Egypt. It flows into Argos, back in Greece. Argos becomes a central city in her cult, and she's worshipped there not as a victim, but as a powerful matriarch. There's even a sanctuary, the Heraion, linked to her. And just to complicate things further, the priestesses of Hera in Argos claimed to be descended from Io. So yes, the woman who got turned into a cow and chased by a horsefly ends up being honored in the very temple of the goddess who cursed her. Irony, poetic justice, divine awkwardness? Pick your flavor. You can almost hear the temple chants echoing through the marble corridors. Praise to Hera. Praise to Io, long live complicated forgiveness. Now, here's a deliciously odd detail. In some versions of the myth, Hera eventually forgives Io, not because she regrets anything, please, but because Io's been through so much, it's starting to feel like kicking a three-legged puppy. And maybe, just maybe, Hera respects endurance when she sees it, especially when it comes with hooves and historical staying power. So Hera lifts the curse. No more gadflies, no more endless wandering. In return, she gets something precious, legacy. Because from Io's line comes not just tragedy, but heroes. And what are gods without humans to worship and glorify them? But don't get too comfortable. We're heading back to the beginning soon. You find yourself now in Argos, long after Io's return. Locals speak of her in reverent tones. Statues depict her both as a woman and a cow, a half-moo, half-miracle figure who defied the gods and lived to tell the tale. You pass one of those statues now. It's got a chipped horn and a solemn gaze, probably wondering where its next existential crisis will come from. A few academics still debate whether Io's myth was meant to explain migration patterns, like how certain Greek beliefs made their way into Egyptian contexts and vice versa. Others say it was simply a metaphor for transformation, how suffering can lead to power, how helplessness can become divine. And you just feel tired. Not in a bad way, more like the gentle weariness of someone who's walked a long road, learned a few divine secrets, and maybe has a pebble in their sandal. You sit down on a stone bench near the temple ruins. Wind brushes through your hair. In the distance, someone's playing a flute badly, probably a satyr who never quite made it into the orchestra. And while the gods have mostly moved on to their next melodrama, you think about what it means to be remembered, not just as a victim or a mythological cow, but as a survivor, a mother, a founder of dynasties, a woman whose story had to be told, even when it was inconvenient for Olympus. And as the shadows stretch across the ruins, you hear one last whisper from the past, soft, amused, and maybe just a little sarcastic. Next time, maybe skip Zeus altogether.
The whisper fades into the twilight, but your journey isn't done. Not yet. Because as you rise from that weathered bench in Argos, something curious draws your attention. A glint of gold in the cracks of a mosaic. You bend down. It's the faint image of a cow, Io again, this time surrounded by strange symbols. Egyptian, Greek, Mesopotamian maybe? The kind of multilingual mess that only divine drama can leave behind. It's a reminder that Io's story is just the beginning of a much longer chain reaction. Because now you follow her descendants, specifically her great-great-great-grandchildren, or however the immortal genealogies go. And it leads you to one of the most spectacularly cursed families in Greek mythology, the House of Atreus. You know, the clan that makes modern soap operas look like polite dinner theater. Let's zoom in on one of those descendants, Danaus. According to myth, Io's line eventually gives rise to this charming patriarch who flees Egypt and arrives in Greece with his 50 daughters, known as the Danaides. Yes, 50. And you thought modern parenting was hard. Now here's where things go from weird to morbidly impressive. Danaus, being the cautious type, marries off all 50 daughters to the 50 sons of his twin brother, Aegyptus. Lovely, right? A symbolic union of two family branches. Except, plot twist, Danaus tells his daughters to murder their husbands on their wedding night. And they do. Well, 49 of them do. One daughter, Hypermestra, decides not to kill her new husband because he respected her boundaries. Imagine that. Ancient chivalry actually sparing someone's life. Wild. Now, why did Danaus order this mass stabbing? Scholars have debated this for centuries. Some say it symbolizes the resistance of Argos to foreign domination, an allegory of Greek resistance to Egyptian control. Others think it's just another example of the mythological obsession with betrayal, family paranoia, and passive-aggressive wedding gifts. Still, this moment is key in the legacy of Io. Her line is cursed not only with suffering, but with impossible choices. Sacrifice love to please your father, or defy him and risk everything. You lean on a crumbling marble wall as the scene plays out in your imagination. Flickering torches, silk veils soaked in guilt, the sound of sandals quietly padding away after a hasty murder. It's unsettling, but you also can't look away. It's like ancient Netflix, disturbing, addictive, morally questionable. And now for the delightful oddity of the evening. In the underworld, those 49 murderous sisters are condemned to an eternal punishment. Their task? Haul water in leaky jugs, forever. There's something hilariously bleak about that. You commit mass homicide and your eternal fate is basically the mythological equivalent of trying to fill a bathtub with a spaghetti strainer. Still, the symbolism sticks. Futility, regret, a lesson in the consequences of blindly following orders, and maybe, just maybe, a jab at ancient plumbing. Meanwhile, Hypermnestra and her husband, Lynceus, for the record, go on to become the ancestors of even more complicated mythological figures, including Perseus, Heracles, and Helen of Troy. Yup, from one tortured woman turned cow comes generations of demigods, queens, and the occasional war-starting beauty, because why not keep things spicy? You wander further through the mythical haze, wondering, did the gods plan this, or were they just as confused by their own cosmic soap opera as we are? A few historians argue that the Danaides myth was originally a water cult story, explaining seasonal droughts and the need for ritual purification, that the leaky jug punishment might even refer to lost water in irrigation canals. But then someone decided to add a little murder to spice things up, and here we are. You pass a statue of Hypermnestra now. She's carved in marble, eyes downcast, hands folded, the only one who chose compassion. The base reads something poetic, probably, if you could still read ancient Doric. You decide it probably says, "Tried not to be awful." And in that moment, as the stars begin to blink awake in the night sky above Argos, you realize something. These stories don't just survive because they're old, they survive because they echo. You see these dilemmas in modern faces, in that cousin who married too fast, in the parent who pushed too hard. In every moment you've had to choose between what's right and what's expected. And maybe, just maybe, you've filled your own share of leaky jugs. Some you still carry, some you've set down for good. Now you're ready to keep going. There are more names ahead, more tangled roots growing from the same cursed tree. And if you squint, you can just make out the glimmer of a golden apple rolling across a divine banquet table. But not quite yet. The golden apple rolls just a little further down the dusty hallway of your mind, and you follow it, not because you're chasing glory, but because it seems polite. And also, you're starting to suspect that Greek myths are less about linear storytelling and more about falling into a slow spiral of divine soap operas and intergenerational pettiness. You step into a garden now, overgrown with ivy, where 3 goddesses lounge beneath a fig tree. You can practically hear the passive-aggressive silence as Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite stare at one another, each pretending they don't care about a certain shiny object. Yes, we've arrived at the Judgment of Paris, a moment so iconic it has its own emotional background music. And of course, because this is mythology, it starts with a party that someone wasn't invited to, specifically Eris, goddess of discord. Honestly, inviting everyone except the goddess of chaos to your wedding sounds like a very poor strategy. Predictably, she crashes the celebration with that infamous golden apple, inscribed with 3 passive-aggressive words, "To the fairest." Cue chaos. The apple bounces onto the banquet table, and suddenly, it's a Greek episode of The Bachelor, but with slightly more divine collateral damage. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite each claim it, and because Zeus doesn't want to deal with this drama, probably for very wise self-preservation reasons, he passes the decision off to a random mortal prince, Paris of Troy. Imagine being a chill shepherd just watching your sheep, and suddenly 3 immortal women appear asking which one of them is hottest. No pressure, right? Now this is where mythological marketing gets fascinating. Each goddess offers Paris a bribe. Hera promises power. He'd rule all of Asia. Athena offers wisdom and military glory. Aphrodite goes full rom-com and offers him the love of the most beautiful mortal woman alive, Helen of Sparta. And Paris, whose judgment history suggests was never particularly nuanced, chooses Aphrodite. Because apparently, starting a 10-year war is a small price to pay for a pretty face and zero self-control. Now here's the strange detail. Some versions say the goddesses appeared nude to influence Paris, which adds a surreal layer to the scene. Divine beauty pageant, but with existential consequences. You wonder if Paris at least offered them refreshments, or just stood there awkwardly, trying not to blink too often. Scholars still argue whether the story was meant as a political allegory, a cautionary tale, or just a delicious bit of divine drama. Was Paris a fool, or simply the scapegoat for the gods' games? Did this moment reflect ancient ideas of fate, that no matter what he chose, the destruction of Troy was inevitable? Whatever the intent, The result is the Trojan War, which looms like a storm cloud at the edge of your journey. And yet, amidst all this mythic grandeur, you can't help but enjoy the oddities. Like the fact that the whole thing began over an apple, a piece of fruit, not a sword, not a betrayal, just a shiny snack with a mean engraving. It makes your own high school arguments over cafeteria seating seem positively noble. You look around the garden, now transformed in your mind into a courtroom of leaves and whispers. Hera taps her fingers, Athena raises an eyebrow, Aphrodite smirks like she's already won. Paris fidgets in his shepherd's cloak, clearly regretting his entire life. And the apple sits in the center, gleaming like a warning. You wonder, was this truly about beauty, or was it about vanity? About how easily mortals can be drawn into divine disputes, and how the gods, immortal and supposedly wise, act with all the restraint of children fighting over a toy. One historian suggested that the story reflects the ancient Greek discomfort with female power. Each goddess represents a different aspect of female agency: political control, intellectual authority, and sexual allure. Paris's choice, then, becomes a metaphor for how society values or fears those things. But then again, it could just be a wild story told around a fire to keep people awake after too much wine. And speaking of staying awake, you notice the garden has begun to dim. The fig leaves close in. Hera's eyes narrow. Athena adjusts her armor. Aphrodite winks. Paris, poor soul, has no idea he's just doomed his entire civilization over a love triangle that hasn't even begun. And you're simply observing, sipping imaginary nectar, taking mental notes. Because from here, the spiral continues into gods disguised as swans, heroes with rage issues, and wars that stretch over decades. You're already halfway through, and it feels like you're just getting started. So, you brush fig leaves from your shoulders, step over the apple, and walk toward the next myth. One that begins not with a cow or a curse, but with a hollow horse and a lot of bad decisions. The fig garden vanishes behind you like a sigh, and now you find yourself trudging along a dusty plain under a sky the color of iron. You feel the tension in the air, like the calm before a group chat explodes. This is Troy, and you're arriving fashionably late to a war that started because Paris couldn't keep his decisions or his hands to himself. The Trojan War has been brewing since Helen sailed away from Sparta with Paris. Or maybe she was kidnapped. Or maybe she just needed a long vacation from her husband Menelaus, who probably thought emotional intimacy was a form of weakness. Honestly, the myths can't agree. That's the thing about history wrapped in legend. It's all a bit squishy. What isn't squishy, however, is the sheer number of epic personalities gathered here. Achilles with his famous sulk, Agamemnon with his ego the size of Mount Olympus, Odysseus being clever in the corner, and a whole mess of demigods and warriors who speak mostly in battle cries and deep metaphors. And somewhere in the middle of all this testosterone is Hera. Oh yes, she's still here, watching, plotting, whispering divine advice into the ears of her favorites, because if there's one thing Hera hates more than infidelity, it's losing a beauty contest. So now, the war is not just about Helen, it's about revenge, pride, and the gods using mortals as little chess pieces with helmets. You walk among the tents of the Greek army, the air thick with sweat and ambition. The cooking fires burn low, and the sound of clashing bronze rings out in the distance. You spot Achilles sulking in his tent because Agamemnon took his war prize. You also notice a warrior trying to clean blood off a shield using only sand and disappointment. And meanwhile, Hera, she's been working behind the scenes like an over-caffeinated theater director. She's furious that Paris chose Aphrodite, and she's determined that Troy must fall, just to prove a point, which is very on brand for Greek gods, petty with a flair for theatrics. Here's a weird little historical nugget. Some ancient texts suggest that Hera didn't just favor the Greeks. She actively sabotaged the Trojans. She would manipulate winds, whisper in dreams, or occasionally seduce Zeus to distract him from helping their enemies, because nothing says war strategy like a divine makeout session. And then there's the argument scholars still love to toss around. Did the Trojan War even happen? Archaeologists have found evidence of a city that was possibly Troy, and signs of destruction that align with the timeline. But was it destroyed because of a stolen queen, or because of trade routes and political control? Was Helen even real, or just a convenient mythological excuse to talk about human desire and divine meddling? You don't need answers tonight. You're here for the mood, and the mood is dusty, dramatic, and deeply confusing. Back on the battlefield, things are escalating. Bodies clash like waves, and arrows arc through the sky like angry birds with bad aim. Hera watches it all, sometimes from Mount Olympus, sometimes from disguised forms among mortals. Once, she even borrows Aphrodite's magical girdle, basically a divine push-up bra of seduction, to lure Zeus into sleep so she can tip the scales in the Greeks' favor. Which raises the question, why did gods need fashion accessories to seduce each other? And also, was there a celestial closet somewhere full of enchanted belts and invisibility togas? You imagine Hera applying divine lip gloss, checking herself in a polished shield, muttering, "This is for that apple, Paris." The weirdest part is how much of this myth blends domestic pettiness with cosmic violence. The gods aren't abstract forces, they're emotionally messy roommates with the power to flood cities. And as you wander past the burning ships and dying oaths, you start to sense something. The myth isn't about who wins or loses. It's about how long people can nurse a grudge when they live forever. Hera doesn't forget. She doesn't forgive. She just rechannels her fury into increasingly complex puppet shows of mortal suffering. And yet, here you are, sleepy, slightly amused, and fully hypnotized by the mythic tangle. You pause by the wooden horse, not the wooden horse, not yet, but perhaps its spiritual ancestor. It looms in the distance like a forgotten birthday gift, oversized and ominous. The war isn't over yet, but you can feel the narrative beginning to shift. Hera still has her eyes fixed on the finish line, not for glory, not even for justice, just so she can say, "I told you so," in the smug tone only a goddess can master. And you trudge on, stepping over golden helmets and half-finished prophecies, headed toward an ending that's been thousands of years in the retelling. The battlefield fades behind you like the echo of an old argument, and now you're climbing a marble staircase that leads into clouds. Actual clouds, puffy, theatrical, vaguely judgmental clouds, the kind that smell like static and divine bureaucracy. You've reached Mount Olympus, or at least some dreamlike version of it. The air here is thinner, cooler, and somehow smells faintly of ego and nectar. You imagine the gods lounging around in golden recliners, debating the fate of mortals like bored influencers arguing over who invented the vibe. And right in the middle of it all, Hera, regal, immaculate, radiating the calm intensity of someone who can destroy your bloodline but still remember your birthday. You sit on a bench made of moonlight, or possibly enchanted alabaster, who knows, and listen as Hera vents, quietly, to herself. She's not done yet, not by a long shot. Because even as the Trojan War drags on like a group project with too many leaders, Hera's planning her next move. She's playing a long game, one that involves reputation, revenge, and a very elaborate social hierarchy among immortals. Now here's a little-known detail. According to some obscure variations of the myth, Hera didn't just meddle in the war, she manipulated prophecy. She may have visited oracles, disguised as a priestess, to whisper false visions into their sacred naps. Imagine being a holy figure just trying to take your afternoon trance, and Hera's there like, "Psst, say the baby with the pretty ankles will destroy Troy." That's right, Achilles may have been the result of a carefully placed prophecy, a divine setup. Hera doesn't do spontaneity. She does spreadsheets of vengeance. But the weirdest part? Even in all this celestial chaos, even after instigating a 10-year war and orchestrating the deaths of heroes, Hera never seems satisfied. She still sits alone at banquets. She still side-eyes Zeus across the throne room. She still aches from the wound of being passed over for that golden apple. You know, the one Paris gave to Aphrodite instead of her. Honestly, if you think high school drama is intense, try immortal beauty pageants with geopolitical consequences. And here's the scholarly debate that never quite resolves. Was Hera truly the villain, or was she simply the only one willing to play by her own rules? Some interpretations paint her as a cautionary tale, jealous, bitter, power-hungry. But others argue she's a symbol of agency in a pantheon where most female figures get sidelined. Sure, she's petty, but she's also powerful. She doesn't just stand next to Zeus, she challenges him. Sometimes publicly, sometimes with lightning.
You watch as Hera now walks along the balcony of Olympus, high above the clouds. She pauses at a railing made from dreams and meteor iron and stares into the mortal world below. Her gaze doesn't waver. You try to follow her eyes, but there's nothing to see, just haze, the kind of fog that covers up secrets and war crimes. A swan glides past, possibly Zeus. It's hard to tell these days. Meanwhile, Hera's robes shift like molten marble, and you notice her whispering a new name, Aeneas. That's right, she's not done with the Trojans just because their city burns. Oh no. Now she's setting her divine crosshairs on the survivors, because one of them, Aeneas, is destined to found a new empire, one that could one day outshine the glory of Greece. And Hera hates that idea. Rome, glorious, founded by a Trojan, not on her watch. Which brings us to the next phase of her long grudge campaign, sabotaging the Roman mythos. You hear her mutter about storms, shipwrecks, sea monsters, bureaucratic delays in Carthage. You know, classic goddess interference. She's going to make sure Aeneas suffers, because in her mind, the war isn't over until the legacy is destroyed. It's here, walking among divine columns and celestial pettiness, that you realize something. Hera might be the true main character of the mythic cycle. Not the warriors, not the heroes, but the one god who always had a plan, who never forgot a slight, who treated divine conflict like a 10-season TV series, and she was the showrunner, script supervisor, and head of wardrobe. Some say the gods reflect the worst of humanity. Others say they exaggerate it. Hera, though, embodies something strangely relatable, that deep, stubborn part of us that refuses to let go of the insult that didn't just hurt, it rewrote our identity. As you wander back toward the edge of Olympus, the clouds begin to roll in, thick, silent, heavy with sleep. You pass Dionysus asleep in a wine barrel. You nod to Athena,
who's reading a scroll upside down just to prove she can. Apollo is tuning a lyre he hasn't played in 2 centuries. And Hera? She's gone again. Back to Earth, or maybe beneath it, or maybe inside the next myth, waiting for someone to say her name wrong so she can throw a thunderstorm through their kitchen window. Either way, the wind starts to hum in your ears, like the soft rattle of ancient coins, and you feel yourself descending. Not falling, just drifting downward, as if the story itself is tucking you in.
You land softly now, as if tucked inside a pocket of twilight. The clouds above dissolve into constellations, and the marble of Olympus is replaced by something much more mundane, the worn stone of a humble temple. It's quiet here. Too quiet for the drama you've just drifted through. You're not in the heavens anymore. You're somewhere mortals actually pray, or used to. Olive trees rustle in the breeze. The scent of crushed herbs and distant incense clings to the night air. And inside the temple, a statue of Hera, serene and unmoving, arms outstretched, gaze eternal, marble curls as frozen as the expression of someone who is just barely tolerating your nonsense. You sit on the steps, catching your breath, and reflect on the fact that for all her divine volatility, Hera had worshippers, temples, festivals, entire cities dedicated to her name. The Heraia, for instance, was a women's foot race held at Olympia in her honor. Long before equality was a hashtag, women were sprinting in her name while wearing short chitons and fierce expressions. Some scholars argue this was proof of her power. Others say it was merely ceremonial, Hera as a placeholder for patriarchal deities. But there's a third theory, quieter and more intriguing, that Hera's mythos was an inherited survival, a stitched-together relic from an older earth goddess, long before Zeus came crashing onto the scene with his lightning bolts and frat boy energy. In that telling, Hera wasn't always a queen by marriage. She was sovereign on her own, a deity of the land, of cycles, of sacred rites. And the jealousy, the scheming, that came later. Narrative baggage from male scribes and Olympian politics. And now here's the quirky detail no one talks about. In some local cults, Hera wasn't always portrayed as mature and stately. There were versions of her as a young maiden, and others as an old crone, suggesting she was once a triple goddess figure, maiden, mother, and elder, all in one. Which means she didn't just evolve, she fractured, rewritten, trimmed down for the mythological mainstream. You look at the statue again, still, cold, slightly offended by birds nesting on her head. And for a fleeting moment, it's like she's watching you back, aware of the long centuries since anyone told her story without picking a side. And then, of course, you remember the cow. Because how could we forget that ridiculous, oddly symbolic transformation? Some say Hera once turned herself into a cow. Others insist it was Io, one of Zeus's love interests, whom Hera cursed by turning into a cow to keep her from seducing him. And then there are even weirder tellings where Hera disguised herself as a cow just to avoid more heavenly drama. Imagine that, a queen of the gods reduced to chewing cud in a meadow just to get some peace. It's absurd, and yet deeply relatable. Who among us hasn't wanted to vanish into something simple and unassuming when the group chat goes nuclear? Of course, the official myth usually focuses on Io, the priestess turned into a heifer watched over by a hundred-eyed monster named Argus. Hera, in a fit of rage, or perhaps twisted mercy, assigns Argus to guard Io, and later, when Hermes slays Argus, she transplants all 100 eyes onto a peacock's tail. That's why peacocks shimmer today, supposedly, because of Hera's grief, or maybe her vanity, or maybe both. And here's where scholars get spicy. Some say the peacock eyes represent surveillance, Hera as the ultimate watcher of infidelity.
Others claim it's a metaphor for wisdom, pattern recognition, divine omniscience. Still others insist it's just a colorful bird, and the ancients were trying to make sense of fancy feathers. Whatever the case, Hera is forever tied to this image, a creature of elegance, danger, and eyes that never quite blink. You look up now. The stars are brighter, the wind quieter. The olive branches sway like they're whispering old gossip. You begin to realize something else. Myths don't just preserve the truth, they negotiate it. They're not museum pieces, they're mirrors. Distorted, yes, but still reflective. And Hera? She reflects back the messy complexity of power and pain and pride that rarely gets a neat ending. You rise slowly from the temple steps. The statue watches you leave, not with malice, but with indifference, the kind that only gods or retired drama teachers can master. The road ahead is dirt and moonlight. You follow it without question now, letting the story carry you. Somewhere in the distance, you hear hooves. Maybe a cow, maybe a goddess in disguise. It's hard to tell in a myth this old. But your body is heavy now. Sleep pools at your feet, climbs slowly up your limbs, anchors your breath in a gentle rhythm. And still, the myth hums. Not loudly, just enough to remind you that even the pettiest of gods once shaped the world. With a golden apple, with a grudge, with a crown and a plan that stretched across empires and centuries and dreams. You walk on, slower now, the road narrowing, the stars turning soft and sleepy above you. Just a little further. The ground beneath your feet becomes less distinct now, like sand at the bottom of a dream. Your steps are feather-light, almost floating, and the myths around you begin to stretch, blur, and fold into themselves, like pages of a book curling in the warmth of candlelight. You arrive at the edge of a wide field, silver with dew, silent under a moon you didn't notice rising. And waiting there, in the middle of it all, is the cow. Yes, that cow. It just stares at you. Big, sleepy eyes. No crown, no thunderbolts. Just a creature whose legend has been tangled up in divine jealousy, cosmic blame, and some pretty extreme identity theft. You sit down. The grass is cool. The air buzzes gently, like a lullaby composed by crickets and distant harp strings. And you finally let yourself think, what was Hera really trying to do? Historians debate whether the myths about her cruelty and scheming were exaggerations, perhaps even propaganda, to minimize her role as an independent deity. After all, male poets told most of these stories, and they weren't exactly handing out awards for divine feminism. Some interpretations suggest Hera's vengefulness came not from malice, but from an ancient and unwritten law of cosmic balance, a kind of divine karma enforcement. If Zeus caused chaos, she restored order, sometimes emotionally, sometimes with a cow. Remember that detail about Io's endless wandering after being turned into a cow? That she crossed oceans and continents, fleeing both divine wrath and human confusion? Some ancient texts say that journey formed the path we now call the Bosphorus Strait, Io's hooves literally carving geography into the earth. And then there's the scholarly oddity. In some versions, Io ends up in Egypt, becomes a goddess there, and births an entire bloodline of kings and heroes. So, from cow to queen, not bad. Others point out the etymological links between Hera and certain older mother goddess figures across the Mediterranean, which suggests her myth is a palimpsest, scraped and rewritten over centuries, but still carrying traces of who she used to be. A protector, a matriarch, maybe even a symbol of nature itself. And the cow? Possibly sacred. Not an insult, not a punchline, but a nod to her ancient pastoral roots, back when cows meant wealth, fertility, and calm mornings with warm milk and no gods cheating on each other. The myth has just been badly edited, like someone took a warm family recipe and drowned it in spicy gossip. The cow munches grass. You smile. Now, let's not forget one of the strangest little fragments in all this. There's a forgotten play, lost to time, where Hera is depicted not as a scorned wife, but as a goddess who forgives Zeus. She walks away from Olympus, not out of weakness, but because she chooses peace. She transforms not into a cow, but a dove, and vanishes into the mortal world. Is that real? Or just wishful fanfiction buried in a dusty scroll? We may never know. But something about it lingers. The idea that even divine archetypes want out sometimes, that even gods grow tired of their own narratives. The stars above you are beginning to dissolve now, like sugar in tea. The cow blinks. You lie down. And the world slows. The field darkens softly around the edges. You can still hear Hera's peacock, somewhere far off, shaking its feathers like a fan snapping closed. And now,
let your eyes close now. There is nothing more to chase, no more gods to impress, no myths left to decode. Only the softness of the grass beneath you, and the weightless hush of sleep circling in slow spirals above your chest. The sky stretches out like velvet, and you drift across it, slowly, gently, effortlessly. Your breath becomes the wind, weaving between tall reeds and old stories that no longer ask to be remembered. You have done enough for tonight. The myths can rest, and so can you. Imagine the soft footsteps of a cow walking through moonlight, each step quieter than the last. Not lost, just free. No thunder, no drama, just peace. Let the whispers of old temples fade. Let the olive trees hush their secrets. Let the divine gossip dissolve into starlight. And as the world turns slowly on its axis, you turn too, into dreams, into stillness, into the quiet rhythm that holds you now like a lullaby with no end. You are safe. You are still. You are already asleep.